there's virtually no assessment of teachers for effectiveness, right? You need
no merit pay. So the best teachers leave. The best teachers say, to heck with this. We're not. There's a person across the hall showing videos all day, and they're getting paid the same or more than me, but just because they've been around the system longer. They reward years of service, not much. And I mean, I mentioned earlier that spending has gone up by 164% in real terms since 1970. Teacher salaries on average have actually only increased by about 3% in real terms.
So where's the bulk of the money going?
I think it's also going to pensions and other benefits too, but it's going towards administrative bloat.
So the same thing that happened at the universities fundamentally.
Same in healthcare. Since 2000, we have data on this in the U.S. And we've seen that enrollment for students has increased in this public school system by about 5% since 2000. The number of teachers in the system has increased about twice that rate, by about 10%. Administrators have increased by about 95%.
Yeah, right. So it's exactly the same pattern as in higher education.
Yeah, it's become a jobs program for administrators.
Well, it's a weird thing. The administrative issue is a very complicated one because the problem with the managerial strata, let's say, is that it's very difficult to parameterize the demand. You know, if you're in a complex system, you can always see that more could be done regardless of the direction you happen to be moving in. And what that implies is that there's no limit to the number of potential administrative contributions, right? And then the question is, well, what would limit the growth of the administration? And in a competitive environment, free market principles essentially limit because you run out of money. Right. So you can only hire as many people as you can afford to hire. This isn't a problem with administrative bureaucracies that have an unlimited source of funding. So they're just going to continue to grow at, I don't know what it is, 5 to 7% a year or something like that.
And there's actually been 4 studies on this. Not a lot, but it's what we have. It's a really niche area of research that the more private and charter school competition in the area, all else equal after they control for all the usual demographic characteristics, the public school teacher salaries slightly go up. And now a lot of people say, oh, that's counterintuitive because it's stealing money from the public schools, they say, which the money doesn't belong to the schools, it's for the kids. But all that aside, because there's also competition, they start to allocate those additional dollars instead of towards administrators, they start to allocate them towards the classroom, towards the teachers. So the teachers who remain actually end up better off. Is that to
stop the teachers moving into the private realm?
Stop them from going to the private sector, stop the kids from going to the private sector, because now if you have, there's a monopsony situation and a monopoly situation. Monopsony is a monopoly in the labor market. With the government school system, if you want to be a teacher, you basically got to take what they give you. But now if you have more competition in the labor market too, competing for your excellence, if you're doing a good job, then the public schools have to say, you know what, we got to treat the teachers better too. So some teachers are underpaid, some teachers are overpaid. Depends on, we try to treat everything as one size fits all in our current system. But that's an interesting finding that actually benefits teachers. But also we found in places like Florida, there is a control group of, you mentioned earlier about how do we compare systems. In Florida, there's 11 academic studies on this topic. 10 of them find positive effects of competition on the outcomes in the public schools. It's been a rising tide that lifts all boats. And just over time, you can see it work out in Florida too. So a couple decades ago, they were at the bottom of the pack on what we call the nation's report card, the math and reading scores. Now, U.S. News & World Report has ranked Florida number 1 on education. They're at the top of the rankings for the nation's report card. And it's not because they pump more money into the system. They spend 27% less than the national average in Florida, but they have school choice for everybody. Same here in Arizona. They have school choice for everybody. If you like your public school, you can keep your public school for real this time, unlike with your doctor. Thanks, Obama, for lying about that. But the public schools, in this case, actually do get better in response to competition. And we have studies all across the nation.
Well, it's funny that you even have to make that case. I mean, it's so absurd that we have to sit here and discuss whether having more provider of a given mandatory service is going to improve quality. Like, well, what else would improve quality? What, wishful thinking or more money? Well, you can spend an indefinite amount of money stupidly and counterproductively. So obviously,
I also did one more study on this issue, and I haven't brought it up in a long time because I've done like 40 peer-reviewed articles on school choice, which is really tough in the academia for education. The peers are your enemies, not your peers.
That's for sure. I'm amazed you managed that.
So I mentioned that first study I did about school choice reducing crime later on in life. It was a very good study, the first of its kind, long-term data, student-level data, very rigorous study. One of the reviewers, and one of the first places we sent it was a journal called Urban Education. One of the reviewers said, we like the methods and we buy that it's a causal relationship, but they said you called the students urban students. You can't say that. They are students in urban areas. So it was like a politically correct thing. And I looked at their About the Journal. The only reason we said that was because they said urban students in their own About the Journal. Total hypocrites on the issue. Why were they allowed to say it, but I wasn't allowed to say it? But they went further than that. They also said that we have to reject this because you didn't talk about how the results relate to whiteness, structural oppression, and power. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. But the study I wanted to bring up about competition was actually in my home state of Texas. I did a survey experiment with my co-author. So I randomly assigned different surveys to public school leaders in Texas. And one of the treatment group had a randomized note that said on one of the questions, you're going to have a new charter school that's expected to open nearby. And I was asking them where they were going to put their money next year, like where were they going to allocate resources? And the treatment of having a charter school competing with you had the effect of reducing administrative allocations and having more of that money going to the classroom.
Any idea why?
Well, because they know that they might have to think about where they're going to spend money if they have a competitor. Because if they waste the money, families are going to go there.
But their argument usually is that obviously it's got to be something like more administrators make for a more effective school system.
That's what they tell you publicly, but privately they know that's all BS, which is what that study, because they didn't know what the study was doing. They just thought I'm answering a simple survey question,
right?
And they didn't know whether they're the treatment group or not. So
right. How did you manage to? You said 40 studies.
Yeah, peer reviewed. Yep.
Yeah, well,
and then other ones that weren't peer reviewed, but I almost think peer review is a negative indicator at this point because of the peers that are looking at your study.
We won't go there. Yes, yeah, but in your case, that's probably not the truth, because the probability that you're going to publish something that challenges absolutely, man. Exactly. So the fact that this is exactly what I'm asking you. It's like over how many years did you publish 40 studies?
2016, I want to say, was my first. So what is this, nine or so years?
So you've published 4 or 5 studies a year.
Yeah, and a lot of them were at the very beginning when I was in grad school, because I thought that mattered for getting an academic job.
Well,
I thought it mattered.
It did matter.
But and I wasn't really serious on the job market, but I applied to like 3 schools, and most people apply to like 100 if you're really serious. But I knew I was probably going to go into a think tank where I'd be rewarded for my ideas as opposed to being punished.
You mean when you were on the job market?
When I was on the job market, my first think tank was called the Cato Institute. It's a libertarian think tank. And I moved to DC while I was finishing my PhD, like 2.5 years into the program. I ended up finishing it. And I've slowed down publications since then, but some of these lefty departments didn't even give me a call. But I had like nearly a dozen peer-reviewed publications at few years into my PhD program.
Yeah, how do you do that?
But
so just for everybody watching and listening, so you can draw a rough equivalent between number of publications and a given degree. So for example, with one publication, you have a master's degree, essentially, although most master's students don't even have 1 publication. With 3, you have a PhD, and you have 40.
Yeah.
Right, and you said you had a dozen of them 2.5 years into your PhD.
Yeah,
okay, so that's...
and some of the far lefty departments won't even call me, and because they select based on ideology. They don't select based on productivity or intelligence or anything like that. But peer review articles are not the same thing as intelligence, I'll say that. But I found out really quickly that, and I'm glad, I had a fork in the road. I did have an offer from one academic institution. It was Kennesaw State University in Georgia. And I think they had like a free market center there, so they were friendly.
So how many publications, how many publications did you have when you entered the job market? Approximately.
Nearly a dozen.
A dozen. Okay, so in principle, you should have been a very hot prospect, because a dozen publications in most institutions would give you pretty
I didn't
serious...
publish in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. It wasn't like the...
Yeah, still,
you know,
a dozen's a lot.
Yeah.
You know, a dozen's a lot, and that would give you serious consideration for promotion to associate professor at many educational institutions. So they should have been lining up at your door. Okay,
But I also didn't do it seriously. Like applying to 3 schools just to put my feet in the water to see what would happen is not the same thing as what most people do with, they're applying to 100 different schools.
True.
And so,
Okay, so you didn't have a full test of whether...
Yeah, it might have not, that it might have been, I might have gotten more of a fair shake if I actually did a real
okay, fair enough.